All right. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely excited to have you. I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Sahmia. I know it's spelled a little weird, so most people are like Sahmia, but no, it's Sahmia. I am a photographer as well as a project manager. So more recently, I shot the photographs for Chris Brown's daughter's party. So I do a lot of like event photography as well as portraiture. Um, I like to consider myself a storyteller. So on top of doing photography, I'm also a writer. I do have a blog that's called Bare Expressions. And it's just basically where I connect with people to share their most authentic stories about their trials and their tribulations. Just because I feel like that's the way in which, we all connect. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I do. I have a dog, I have a partner. We live in sunny Long Beach, California. I do yoga as a form of like healthy self-care. So,
Love it. But you also have a story to tell.
yeah.
And I would love for you to take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your lost story.
Absolutely. So, my journey to motherhood has been quite interesting. If I could just be frank, it was nothing like what I thought it was going to be. Um, I never imagined that I would be a part of this, what I'm finding to be the most beautiful club of, angel mothers, as we like to call ourselves, because truthfully, before I got pregnant, I never knew that loss was something that could happen. It's like I heard that it happened, but I never imagined that it would happen to me. And on top of that, a part of me is grateful that it happened. So I want to say back in 2021, right around June, I started feeling like, oh my goodness, my hormones are changing. Like I'm getting older, my body's changing, not necessarily knowing like, hey, you're in the early stages of pregnancy. So my body was, I was experiencing like all the symptoms like heat flashes, weight gain, which was never a problem for me. Like I started gaining weight and I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got these thighs. Where did these come from? So I started having all of these insecure body issues before I actually found out that I was pregnant. And in finding that out, I was so nervous because before I ever became a mother, I wanted to do as much healing as possible. And I felt like I just started therapy, like mentally, I'm not sure if I'm ready and all of these things. So it took me a little while to open up to the idea of becoming a mother just because I felt like I was not ready. I'm in my 30s and I was going into my 30s. So I was like, I should be ready. And all of my parents and everybody like were saying, you, when are you going to have a baby? And I just felt spiritually like, okay, I'm not ready. Um, Fast forward to, I want to say my 17 weeks, I started feeling what I thought was round ligament pain. And I was like, well, I'm growing a baby. Like I just started kind of popping. And I was like, yeah, I'm not necessarily sure if these pains and these aches that I'm feeling are normal, but I'm just going to rock with it. Like I'm going to go with it because it's all new. So whatever, I'm supposed to feel is what I'm supposed to feel. And I remember my dad telling me, because we were throwing a party at the time, my dad was telling me like, you should probably go get checked out. And I was like, I think I'm fine. Like, I feel like I'm fine. It's just, it feels like it's just my sciatic nerve. It doesn't feel like it's anything that I should really be concerned about. We had ended up finding out the gender of our baby. We were having a girl. And we both got really excited. And it was at that point that my belly had started really showing. And I was like, oh, okay, like there's a baby in there. And I started to feel her move. And, she and I would have like just little communications where like I would tap on my belly and she would tap back. So I was like, oh wow, okay, we're connecting. So I had started opening up to being a mom because I was like, okay, now I have this belly. And my partner was extremely excited. Like he was so in love with the belly. And I want to say it was at 19 weeks. So the week after we had found out what we were having, that I went to bed like nothing was wrong. I want to say, if I'm going backwards, like fast forward, while I was at work, I had started feeling like mucus was falling out of me. And I was like, I don't know if this is normal. So I sent a picture to my friend and I was like, is this what I'm supposed to be seeing around 19 weeks? And she was like, She was like, I mean, your mucus increases. She was like, but it's not supposed to be a lot. So she started asking me about the consistency of it, if I was having any like different smells. And I was like, no, everything seems normal. I just thought it was increased mucus, not necessarily knowing like my mucus plug had leaked. And I was just like, okay. So I went grocery shopping, came home, had a small yoga session, went to bed, and then I was awoken and I was like, something doesn't feel right. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel right. And I started to have what were now what I know as like small contractions. And I was like, okay, that doesn't feel normal. So I got in the bathtub. I ended up doing a cervical check, and it felt like I felt my daughter's feet moving. Like I felt something really moving really fast. And I was like, okay, that's definitely not supposed to happen. So my partner rushed me to the hospital. While I was in the ER, they started asking me, because during the time it was like the height of COVID. So they were like, are you vaccinated? And at the time I wasn't vaccinated. And they were just like, oh my God, you're pregnant. You definitely should. So they were trying to make COVID a really big deal. Meanwhile, I'm like, I feel like I'm in labor and we're having a conversation about this vaccination. So the ultrasound lady or the ultrasound tech came in and she scanned me and she didn't say anything. And I started asking her questions like, well, is everything okay? And I could hear her heart. I could hear my baby's heart beating like normal. And I was like, I'm telling myself, everything feels like it's okay. Like it doesn't feel like anything's wrong. But the ultrasound tech, her eyes just got really big and she didn't say anything. She was like, I'm going to have the doctor come in and talk to you. And I think it was at that point that it dawned on me like, okay, something's definitely not right. And they didn't allow my partner in because he wasn't vaccinated. And so I just had him on the phone with me. So he's listening to the doctor tell me basically, you're likely having a miscarriage. And I was extremely confused because I was like, but her heart is beating. Like I hear her heart beating and it's beating healthy. Like there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. And she was like, well, we have to rush you to labor and delivery because you could literally give birth at any moment. So of course, in my brain, I'm like, what? Well, it's not time for her to come yet. Like, can you guys like push her back in there? Like, how can we get her to go back in? Um, when I got to labor and delivery, the nurse and the doctor up there, they basically were like, well, if we're being frank with you, you've dilated, you're all the way dilated to 10 centimeters. You can, again, give birth either from laughing or coughing at this moment. So, we're going to have to deliver her. And then they just started kind of preparing me for, the worst, basically. And by that time, my partner had made it upstairs. They allowed him to come upstairs. And my nurse was like, you can call your parents and we'll have them come up whenever they get here. It doesn't like we normally aren't supposed to allow too many people in the room with you, but you can have whoever you want to come up here. So I was like, okay. So my partner gets in the bed with me and I'm just letting him know like, hey, I'm going to have to give birth to her. More than likely, she's not going to survive, even though she sounds 100% healthy and normal. There's not going to be much that they can do. So we had to make really hard phone calls to our parents, kind of let them know what the situation was. Also keeping in mind, like our parents were first-time grandparents. So this baby was like everybody's pride and joy. They're like, oh my God, they're super excited. So having to deliver this news was devastating. And then realizing myself, like, okay, you kind of have to be strong because you have to give birth to this baby now. Like, this is what you weren't necessarily prepared for, but it's here. So we had a male doctor come in and he basically kind of treated me like my baby was passed. And he was just like, I can give you an epidural and we can give you Pitocin to kind of speed things up. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I definitely don't need Pitocin. I don't need an epidural because quite frankly, I missed all of the labor signs. And he, went through the motions of asking me all of these different questions. And he was just like, well, I think what happened was either you caught an infection or you just have an incompetent cervix. And those words to me were so confusing because I was like, I've never had a child before. So for you guys to say you have an incompetent cervix without like having done any test or anything like that makes absolutely no sense to me, because I've never had a kid before. So how am I supposed to know? And he was like, well, honestly, you really won't know until, you have another child. And I just was like, I was thinking to myself, if this is the information that we're getting as women in regards to, I see, like, how are we supposed to ever prepare for this? Like, why is it that we have to go through extremely painful moments for you guys to deliver this type of news? Like, is there not any tests that you guys can run to check for this early on? So um, he leaves out of the room. My nurse comes in and she just asked me, she was like, she basically prepared me for what's going to happen. She was like, you're going to experience, all of this joy, and then you're going to have to say goodbye, but know that, you have all the time in the world to say goodbye to your baby. And she was like, unfortunately, because she does have a heartbeat, we have to treat this like it's a live birth. And at the time, I didn't necessarily understand what she meant by that. And I just asked her, I was like, can we please just talk to the NICU nurse just to see if there's anything that we can do? And she was like, I'm going to tell you right now, I want to say the hospital that I was at was like a level 2 or 3. So they weren't necessarily prepared to like care for a baby that premature. She was like, she's going to tell you these same things, but you can have a conversation with her. So I want to say maybe like an hour or two passed by, and the NICU nurse came in and she basically showed me all of the tools that they would use. And keep in mind, at the time, I was going through heavy contractions. So things had started speeding up. And I'm talking to her, but I'm having contractions. And then there was one point where it was time for me to just push her out. And when I tell you that was the easy part. Like, labor was so easy because, number one, I didn't necessarily have the intense contractions that one would have like with a normal sized baby. And two, she was out really, really quickly. And it was in an ironic way, it was really beautiful that my partner got to see her and tend to her. So it was almost as if everybody who was in the room treated her like a live baby, except for the doctor. The doctor was very cold through the process, but the NICU nurse, like, went into action. Like, she took her pulse, she let us know what time she was born, and immediately they were like, do you want to put her on your chest? And I was, unfortunately, at the time, I was so afraid because I was like, I don't know what she's going to look like. And my partner, we had a bet early in our relationship who the baby would look like. And he just goes, I just want you to know that you were going to lose the bet. And he brought her over to me, and she was the most beautiful, peaceful little being. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is what we made. And all the fear that I had, prior to that, like, went away because of how beautiful and tiny she was. And her heart was still beating. And it was like, she kind of grabbed onto my hands, and I was like, oh my God, like, she knows, like, we have a connection here. So I want to say it was probably maybe about 10 minutes after that it literally set in, like, we're gonna have to say goodbye, and this sucks. Like, this sucks so, so bad. And just watching, like, my partner have joy and have sadness at the same time was so gut wrenching, because I'm like, there is absolutely nothing that we can do. And the NICU nurse hugged us really, really tight. And she was just like, I'm so sorry, because she's so beautiful. And, I just pray for you guys' healing. And our nurse, what was beautiful was that our nurse stayed with us from the time we got to the ER, or the time we got to labor in the ER, which was at like 4:00 in the morning, all the way into the end of her shift. And she allowed us to be with the baby. And I think the hard parts for me was having to sign her birth certificate and then having to sign her death certificate, because she stayed with us for, I want to say her heart stayed beating for about 2 hours. So we were able to like be with her for that 2 hours and pray over her and all of the things. Like, my mom was able to come and hold her, which was like ironic because my mom she's dying to be a grandparent. So just for her to have that experience was like heartbreaking, because I had to watch her heartbreak in the same instance as, you know, my own heart is breaking. So we were in the moment where we had to actually say goodbye to her. I think that's kind of when everything rushed in and hit me like, okay, this is goodbye. Like this is the end. And I started to have just regrets of not appreciating the beginning of pregnancy, like when I found out to you know, to the end of it. And I was just like, this is what life is. This is what life is. Like it's full circle. Like we literally just experienced everything that a human can experience in the course of 12 hours, from being, you know, worried to being angry to being happy, to being joyful, to being extremely sad and heartbroken. And I just remember like driving home was probably the loneliest. It was the loneliest feeling that one could ever feel, because it's like you feel empty. Like as the woman, I felt so empty because it wasn't just my heart that was broken. It was also my partner's. And then it was also our parents. There were so many different people that were connected and so excited for our baby that it was like, man, it sucks that we have to deliver this news of, you know, it just not being our time, and or it just not being her time, or, you know. So yeah, I think the aftermath was probably the hardest, and it's been the hardest. Luckily for me, I've been in therapy. So I was in therapy prior to. My therapist kind of talked me through all the emotions that I was feeling before we ended up having her. And then afterwards, my therapist and my doula, they were so connected to me during that time, and really made sure that my mental, not that it was going to be the greatest, but that it stayed at the very least level. So I was able to talk through all of the feelings that I was having, because I mean, as you know, every mother who's experienced this has experienced, it's like you go through being really angry. Like I was so mad at my body because I was like, how dare you? How could you? Grant, like we've been on this journey for 29 years together, and now all of a sudden, when you're the one responsibility that you have to carry a child, you kind of drop the ball. So I was so mad at my body. And then that anger started to turn outward to like people, because so many people didn't understand. And I didn't understand how people didn't understand why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. Like so many people would call and just, you know, of course, wanting to give kind words and with well intentions. You guys can have another one. You guys will be fine. You guys will be married eventually, and then you'll have a bunch of babies. And I'm like, it's not about having a bunch of babies. It's that one that we wanted. We wanted her, not a bunch of other babies. Granted, we can have other babies, but we wanted her. And what I struggled with was just the fact that it was really uncomfortable for people to actually acknowledge the fact that I had a daughter. I'm like, the acknowledgement of her, like she was born alive. She was alive for 2 hours. Like we've cremated her. We've had our own little ceremony for her. Like it was all real, you know? So a part of like my journey has just been making sure that her name is still spoken, that she still is acknowledged, like whenever I'm out or just in conversation organically, without it being something that's uncomfortable. Because in so many ways, bringing her up is so uncomfortable for people. Like for my dad, it was really uncomfortable for him. Like it took him almost a year to acknowledge that he was a grandfather. And I was so upset with him about that, because he would feel like, oh, well, you know, why aren't you happy right now? Or why aren't you chipper at like family events? And I'm like, my daughter's not here to enjoy this. You know, she should be, you know, 8 months here, you know, almost a year old. That's why I'm not happy, you know. Or we would have like, there have been moments with like my partner where it's like his dad will say things like, I'm supposed to be a grandparent. And he's like, but you are a grandparent. You have a granddaughter. She just passed away. So for us, it's really grooming our families to really understand that our daughter was alive, whether or not they got to see her or witness, you know, her energy. She was alive, and she's a part of this family for forever. You know, like I have a whole little shrine like right over here that's dedicated to her. And I'm like, I've had to learn how to accept the fact that not everybody's going to understand even that. And it's like, okay, be forgiving and grant people grace, but don't falter in acknowledging her, because she's real. And she shows up in so many different ways. Like every morning there's a yellow butterfly that passes us. And I'm like, I see you, baby girl.
She's watching over you, making sure you not, let you know that that you're being taken care of, but she is definitely watching you. And I love that. I love that. I think it takes a time. I love this conversation about your family and the grandparents for you and your parents and then your partner's parents, because I don't think our families acknowledge our losses as profound, even with first, and as significant until the living child gets here. And I'm a witness to that as well. So like, I don't think my parents actually acknowledged that I had two other losses or they were grandparents until I had my physical child. And I was just like, no, you all know that I had two other babies. They just aren't here. Like, so it just takes time. And I love that you have given people grace as they go through their own grief journey. Because I think when people grieve, they're grieving for us, especially our parents. And they want to make sure that we're protected and we're not hurt, but really they're grieving too. And they haven't really acknowledged what that looks like or how does that come about. So I'm happy that you are saying, hey, no, you did have your grandchild. Your grandchild
Oh
just not
yeah.
here in the physical. She's in heaven, but she's still here. She's very much still here, very much still around us. I also love that you have gone to therapy and really have worked through with your therapist prior to pregnancy and then actually in your postpartum period. I would love for you to share a little bit more about that, about how you've navigated through postpartum, because it has not been a year yet. So this is truly real fresh that you've gone through this journey over these last few months, navigating what this postpartum period looks like without having a child, but also how some of those tools and therapy have helped you navigate through it.
Sure. So, I mean, initially, of course, like I dealt with so much anger, and it was like anger that I didn't even know. I didn't know where it was coming from, and it was the kind of anger that, I mean, I'm sure that you've experienced, and I think you would have to experience it to know what I'm talking about, but it comes from so deep within. Like there would be moments where like I have glass, everything. I want to break all the glass. And being able to talk through it with my therapist was so beneficial. Like she did a lot of like visual exercises with me, just because like in our conversations, I would just bring up moments where I regret certain things. I'm like, I regret, not appreciating pregnancy, because for forever, I've always wanted to be a mother. I just wanted to be healed to be a mother, because I feel like as Black women, we have so many wounds that we need to heal from growing up. So I'm like, I just want to be healed when I become a mother. And I remember my mom telling me, like, you can't plan everything. And then my therapist telling me the same exact thing, but also giving me the power of visualization and meditation to be able to go back and redo those things. Like there was one profound, actually two profound meditations that we did together. One, I was in crisis, and I was having a moment where I was just like, I really just need a hug from a grandmother. And both of my grandmothers have passed away. So I was just like, I just really need a hug from an elder woman that has probably been through loss before, that can just console me. And she was able to walk me through being able to, hug my great grandmother. And then the second one was going back to like meditating and going back to when I was in the hospital and I didn't actually put my daughter on my chest. And I'm like, I always think about it. And I mean, to this day, I think about, how she probably would have stayed a little bit longer had she just been able to hear my heartbeat, because that's what she's used to hearing. She's used to hearing our voices, but more than hearing our voices, she's used to my heartbeat. So I had, fought through that, and she was able to kind of walk me through. And that was such an emotional like meditation, but it stuck with me because it's like, I feel so much better knowing that, even though she's not here physically, she knows that she was loved. and she like came to this space knowing like her parents wanted her. So yeah, like postpartum, I mean, even going through it now, it's still one of those things that I definitely move through, and therapy again has helped. Meditation is phenomenal. Yoga has also been more recently my saving grace, just because it provides me peace and it allows me to fall back in love with my body. Because for a year I was so betrayed by my body and I hated my body. Like I, did all of the worst things when it came to my body. And we don't talk enough about how postpartum can sometimes send you into a depression. And I feel like when you're going through it as a mother, it's one thing, but when you're going through it without your child here as a reminder of like, okay, this is why I'm going through all of this, it's even harder. So even having to have grace with postpartum moms that I know now that have their kids physically, I'm like, man, I feel for you, sis. But at the same time, your kid is here for you to look at and for you to be like, okay, there's a reason why I'm going through this. Mine is not here for that. And I have to rely on these tools, and I have to fall back in love with my body in an effort to, keep going and having hope and having faith. Like my therapist always talks about just keeping faith while going through the process. She's like, you have to remain faithful and you have to remain hopeful, because it will happen again. Like as cliche as it sounds, it is going to happen again, but only when you're ready. Because a lot of what I battle even now is just being afraid of the same thing happening again. I don't know if you experienced this, but I actually ended up getting pregnant earlier last year. I want to say it was like not the same time last year, but like March, April-ish. And I ended up having a blighted ovum. So that was my first time having a miscarriage. And I was like, I've never had one of these before. I'm not too upset about it, but it's definitely triggering. And being able to navigate that with my therapist helped with the process, so that it allowed me to kind of release that moment in time, but knowing like, okay, I am still able to get pregnant. So, okay, there's hope there.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. As that is another loss and definitely something that you have to work through. What does this subsequent loss look like? I was going to ask you about just your plans to conceive. Are you looking to try to conceive again? Are you taking time off? Are you changing any other habits? Diet, nutrition. I know you're doing yoga, which I love yoga, and meditation. Those are great practices to incorporate as we look to, think about trying to conceive.
Yes. So we have been in talks about it. Just because I feel now, because it'll be 2 years in October. So now I'm like, okay, I feel like mentally I'm ready. Like I know that I would grab on to the concept and idea of being pregnant again and like really taking care of my body. Now I'm just kind of in preparation mode, just because of the idea of incompetent cervix. I'm like, what does that look like? What exercises do I need to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because I can't take the pain of losing a child like that. Like that is entirely too much. So more recently, I've been looking into like pelvic floor therapy, because I'm like, I know that that's a thing, and I want to be able to make sure that my pelvic floor is strong, so that, a relaxed cervix, as a midwife told me, isn't a thing, because I feel like it should be curable. If it's not curable, I feel like it should be. And I've also tweaked my diet. So eating less meat, taking more vitamins, like really, really taking vitamins, and changing back from being like, eating all kinds of food to just eating pescatarian. So eating fish, grains, whole foods, mostly plant-based. So yeah, we are planning on it. It's just, for me anyway, it's a scary concept, just because of the things that we've gone through. So I'm like, I know it's not going to be rainbows and butterflies. Like I've had conversations about it where I'm like, how does one stay happy post loss? Like how do you navigate pregnancy post loss? What does that look like? How do you remain faithful through that process. And the unknown of that is kind of frightening, but it's not something that I'm not willing to take on.
Love it. Love it. So I would love for you to leave our listeners with encouraging words as they navigate through their own journeys.
Sure. I think I would say remember who you were prior to becoming a mom, and then embrace who you are as a mom. And don't forget that your child is always with you. Find them in, everyday life. Like for us, it's always a butterfly or it's a symbol of an elephant that, we'll see. And it's like, oh, there goes Aya. So I think the beautiful thing that you can do is speak to your child out loud when you feel their presence, and find them just in everyday life, because they're there, however they show up, whatever symbol comes to you just naturally. So yeah, really just be who you are, remember who you were prior to, embrace who you're becoming, and recognize your child whenever they show up, because they're there.
I love it. So where can we connect with you after this episode?
After this episode, you can follow my personal page at being Sahmia Ase on Instagram. You can also follow me on Bare Expressions on Instagram as well. I believe it's spelled Bare, BARE.expressions. And that's kind of where you will find other stories of trials of tribulations, not just about pregnancy loss, but, body image, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, things like that. So, yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast. And I am excited to follow your journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this space. This was really helpful.
Perfect. All right.